Shri Sai Ram. Dear students, welcome back to the 10th class state syllabus science textbook 2 and the chapter How do organisms reproduce? Today we will be discussing the second part of this chapter about the sexual reproduction. Before we start to understand the second part of this chapter, let us recap our previous class key points and also check out the answers for the home assignment 1 and get it cleared. In our previous part of the same chapter, we have understood that life process is an essential part to sustain and retain life. The activities that are carried out to sustain and retain the life is called as life processes, and we understood that nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion are part and parcel of a living organism to retain its life. Then a question arrived to us whether the reproduction is a life process. Very happy that Sai Krishna is ready to answer to this question that reproduction is not a life process, but still it is essential for the retention of the species, that is, to increase the members which look alike. In the evolution of the species, the reproduction is essential. Further, we continued that the similarities and the variations are a must for the living organisms. The reason, as we defined that the reproduction is nothing but a process where the parents are going to give birth to their young ones which are alike. So the similarities of the offsprings to their parents and few variations in the offsprings are mainly due to the DNA copying or the DNA replication, which plays a major role in similarities and variations in the offsprings. And these similarities and variations are essential for the survival of the species, which we understood. Further, we continue to know about deeper part of the reproduction, where the whole reproduction is being divided into two types, the asexual reproduction and the sexual reproduction. We continue to discuss in detail under the same chapter in the part 1 about the asexual reproduction and its various modes: fission, the fragmentation, the regeneration, the budding and vegetative propagation are the 6 varieties of asexual reproduction types to the 10th class level, which we understood in our previous class. Now let us check out and get clear about the answers for home assignment 1. The first question: why is DNA copying an essential part of the process of reproduction? It's very essential, as DNA plays a major role in the process of reproduction because it carries the genetic information from the parents to the offsprings. Since the DNA carries the genetic information from where? From the parents. To where it is going to carry? It carries to its offsprings or to its daughter cells or to their children, which are exactly similar to the parents. So the similarities carried from parents to offspring is mainly due to the DNA copying or the DNA replication, which divides into two equal parts. Essential, most essential part of the process of reproduction. The second question, variation is beneficial to the species but not necessarily for the individual. Justify. Surely for a species in general it is most essential because it's an important and beneficial for species as it allows a species to adapt to a changing environment. Only those who adopt the changes can survive. But for an individual, the variation does not matter in most conditions. Very happy to see that the two questions are also being correct by most of the students when I see their smiling faces with confidence that they have written the answers correctly, which shows you have committed to the studies and you have concentrated towards the content while listening. The third question, list out the various modes of asexual reproduction with one example for each. According to the 10th standard level, the various modes of reproduction under asexual reproduction, the first one is fission. An example is amoeba. The second one, the fragmentation, the spirogyra. The third one, the regeneration, and the example is planaria. The fourth one, budding, and the example is hydra. The fifth one, the vegetative propagation, the example is bryophyllum. The sixth one, the spore formation, rhizophus. Almost all have written correct answer for this third question. The fourth question, how will an organism be benefited if it reproduces through spores? So the spore reproduction is benefited to few of the organisms. How? If we think of advantages of reproduction through spores, the first point, spores can remain dormant till favorable conditions become available. Till the favorable condition is available for the spores to develop into new individuals, they will be protected in a sheet of cover called as sporangium. The spore reproduction help an organism to tide over the bad phase, to withstand. It also helps to spread through water, air or animals, which are the modes for the spores to spread. The fourth point, the spore reproduction is quick and multiplies many at once. So in a short span of life, we can see the species increase in number if it undergoes the spore reproduction, the spore formation. Fifth question, how does binary fission differ from multiple fission? The terms itself tells us the difference. In binary fission, the parent cell divides itself into two equal and identical daughter cells. Whereas in multiple fission, a single parent cell is divided into many daughter cells. So binary fission, a single parent divides into two equal identical daughter cells. Whereas in multiple fission, a single parent is going to divide into many daughter cells. So as we already know, the binary fission, the example goes to amoeba. The example is amoeba. And in multiple fission, it is plasmodium, which we have understood already in our previous class. Today's part 2 of the chapter How do organisms reproduce is our sexual reproduction. The second type of reproduction. What this sexual reproduction means? Reproduction that is being carried out through sex cells or through gamete formation and the fusion of the gametes between the individuals of different sex. It's a highly evolved, a complex and also well organized process of reproduction seen in higher plants and higher animals. What is sexual reproduction? Reproduction carried out between two individuals of different sexes with the formation of gametes and union of gametes. It is the process in which new organisms are created by combining the genetic information. When the genetic information is combined by the fusion of the gametes. From where? From two individuals of different sexes. In simple to define, what is sexual reproduction? Reproduction carried out with the help of sex cells or gametes by the individuals of different sexes is called sexual reproduction. Flowering plants which are termed as angiosperms. An example of hibiscus flower picture is being viewed by all of you. Fish, bird, elephant, human beings, etc. are the examples which undergo the sexual reproduction. You can observe the pictures of the examples also. In detail, the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, what you are observing, the picture of flowering plants. Immediately if I see the flowers, pictures or in nature, originality, the original growth of the plants and the flowers that are blooming, if you have observed very keenly, you can see always the flower blooms towards the sky. What it symbolizes? Aim high, low aim is crime. The flower teaches us always our aim should be high. What is that aim? That it is seeing towards the sky, which symbolizes that we all should turn towards God. Keeping God in the center of our activities, success is always ours. Which Lord Krishna preaches to Arjuna in the celestial song called as Bhagavad Gita. The last slokam of the Bhagavad Gita tells, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdaraha, Tatra Shrir Vijayor Bhutihi, Dhruvanitir Matir Mama. Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, where the God or the Lord resides, and where Yatra Partho Dhanurdaraha, where the complete surrendered disciple or the student or the devotee called Arjuna resides, there always victory. When it comes, only when we keep God in the center of our activities. Immediately when I see these colorful flowers which are bloomed, the pictures when you observe the flowers, all the flowers are blooming, and all this blooming towards the ultimate goal of merging in God. That is, seeing towards the sky, which teaches us to aim high. And that aiming of highness is nothing but, or that high aim is nothing but keeping God as the center of our activities. So if we see these flowering plants, this is the value which we can learn. And the flower blooms just for making all happy. So our life is to make others happy. When we see anybody sees the flower that is being bloomed, we feel so happy and also so much blissful. These flowering plants, how they reproduce? It is the sexual reproduction. So, the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, and the flowering plants are also called as the angiosperms. Angio, capsule, sperm, seed, capsulated seed. Seeds are covered within the seed coat. They are flowering plants, highly evolved, well-developed root system, well-developed shoot system with perfect leaf venation, which you will study in higher classes about angiosperms. The sexual reproduction in flowering plants mainly takes place with the help of flower. So, angiosperms are flowering plants and the flower is the reproductive part. The flower, which is the reproductive part in the angiosperms, and the examples are the jasmine, the hibiscus, the sunflower, the rose, etc. All flowering plants. A picture of a dahlia is being depicted here. This sexual reproduction in flowering plants, which we call it as the angiosperms, then what are the parts that are found in a flower? The parts of a flower, if you just understand the various parts in a flower, it has mainly 4. And the parts in a flower is called as whorls. The whorls of a flower are the calyx, the corolla, the androecium and the gynoecium. These are the 4 important parts or the whorls in a flower. Then what is this calyx? Dear students, all of you have observed flowers, and when you have a regular sort of offline classes, that is in a classroom situation, your teacher will practically provide you the flowers, and by holding the flowers you can understand more clearly about the parts of a flower. If not also, if you have in your surroundings the flowers, you can pluck one flower and you can observe all the parts by yourselves. The first part of a flower is the calyx. What this calyx is? It is a collection of sepals. The flower, when it is in bud state, this sepal, which is in needle shape, is going to protect the flower in its bud state. So, calyx, the collection of sepals which protect the flower in bud state. You can put a comma or a full stop also. The next is corolla. Corolla is nothing but collection of petals. Single is petal, collection of the petals is called corolla. You know, petals are of different colors. With the different coloration, it attracts the insects for pollination. That is the function of corolla. So, collection of petals is called corolla and it attracts the insects for pollination. The third one, andrecium, collection of stamen, a male reproductive part in the flower. The fourth one, gynoecium, collection of carpels or pistil also we will call it as, female reproductive organs in flower. So by knowing the 4 parts in a flower, we have classified that these two, that is the calyx and corolla, are called non-essential parts of a flower because they don't take part in reproduction. Hence we call them as non-essential whorls or parts we call them as. Whereas the andrecium and the gynoecium, they help or they take part in the sexual reproduction in flower. Hence we call them as essential whorls. Called as essential whorls. So be alert and remember that the whole parts of the flower are divided into 2. One is non-essential whorls and the essential whorls. The non-essential whorls are the calyx and the corolla. The essential whorls, the andrecium and the gynoecium. The single unit of calyx is the sepal. The single unit of corolla is the petal. The single unit of andrecium is the stamen. And the single unit of gynoecium is the carpel or the pistil. Name the 2 non-essential whorls in a flower. Very happy to see Sai Prasad has risen his hand. Correct. It is calyx and corolla. Which is the female reproductive part in a flower? Very happy that Rahul has raised his hand. Correct. The answer is gynoecium is the female reproductive organ. The single unit of andrecium is called stamen. Dear students, this is a typical hibiscus flower, a very important for the examination also connected to diagrams. Draw a neat labeled typical flower and label all the parts. So if you observe, a hibiscus flower is a typical flower where you can see the calyx, that is the sepal which is protecting the flower in its bud state. The petal, but this collection of these petals is corolla. Then you can see the pistil or the carpel. The pistil or the carpel, it has 3 parts mainly, which we will discuss that more in detail further. It is the sticky stigma which is at the tip, the style which is an elongated tube, and the ovary which is the bulged part. So totally the pistil has stigma, style and ovary. Then you have the stamen, the single unit of male reproductive part, the stamen which is having anther and an elongated filament. Hope all of you have understood these parts of a flower. It is of 4 main parts: calyx, corolla, andrecium and gynoecium. The parts of a flower a very important when connected to the diagram. Simple way, in a simple mode, how we can draw the diagram of the flower. Let us, in a simple way, if you want to draw the flower, a typical flower, the stalk of a flower is called as the pedicel. Next you can see a bulged part which is called as the thalamus. Next you have the sepals. The sepals are green. They appear like leaves. As I already told, either in needle shape or also they may be in the form of small leaf. This is called as the sepal, which protect the flower in bud state. Also, since it is green, to some extent help in photosynthesis. Next you have the colorful, what I mean as petals. You can see a simple way of drawing a diagram. It's a 3-mark question. Very important from exam point of view. Petals are there which are colorful. Then you have, I mean as, draw it here, stigma. Carpel I am drawing first. Stigma is there. And the style, an elongated style. Then it is ending with a bulged ovary, where inside that ovary you can observe the ovules. These are the ovules. Then you can see the stamen. An elongated filament is there, and also you have the anther with an anther lobes. So the anther lobe, inside the anther lobe you can observe what I mean as the pollen grains. We'll study this deeper when we understand the process of reproduction in flowers. So very simple. 3 out of 3 marks you will get if you draw such a diagram, even in the exam when it is being asked. Draw a neat labeled diagram of a typical flower and label the parts. So the parts, if you label, in the parts, this is called as pedicel. Then you can see sepal, where the collection of the sepals is called calyx. Next you can see the colorful petal, and the collection of the petals is corolla. Next you can see at the top, for your kind information, it's a sticky stigma. It is sticky in nature. And we have this elongated part which we call it as style. Then you have the bulged part, ovary. And inside you have the ovule. Then you have the filament, then elongated part, which we call this elongated part as filament. The bulged part as the anther and anther lobe, and inside you can see the dots which we call them as the pollen grains. Pollen grains. These are the parts of a typical flower. Most of the times even they may ask to draw the reproductive parts in the flower. We know the reproductive parts is the androecium and the gynoecium. The single unit of the androecium is the stamen. So the stamen, to draw the stamen, it's very simple for your kind information. I hope you have understood this. Now if I want to draw the stamen, please observe it. It's a very simple one. Just you draw like this, that's all. And you can mention here stamen. And this stamen is having an elongated filament. Then you have anther. And inside this you can see the pollen grains. Stamen diagram, which is a male reproductive part. Then if you think of the gynoecium, the single unit of the gynoecium is called as the pistil. The pistil or the carpel has three main parts. Very important. Draw the diagram of a pistil. So the pistil has three parts. The sticky stigma, an elongated style, and a bulged ovary, where inside you can see the ovules. This is pistil, or it is also called the diagram of a carpel. This is the female reproductive part. The female reproductive part, which is called as the pistil. I hope the students have understood in a simple way how to draw a typical flower and also the reproductive parts called as the stamen, the male reproductive part, and the pistil or the carpel, which is the female reproductive part in flowers. If you observe the picture which is being depicting for all of you, the sepal, the petal, the androecium, and in detail where you can observe here the gynoecium, also called carpels, the collection of carpels or the pistil, where you can see the stigma, the style, the ovary inside which the ovules. And here the androecium, which is nothing but the collection of stamens, and the filament, the anther with pollen grains inside, which are minute. Unisexual and bisexual flowers. Flowers are of mainly two types: unisexual flowers and bisexual flowers. Unisexual flowers, group of flowers which may have either the stamen or the carpel in them. Such flowers are called unisexual flowers. Flowers which contain either only pistil or only stamens. The examples are the corn, the papaya, and the cucumber. The bisexual flowers, group of flowers which have both the stamen as well as the pistil in them. Example, the mustard, the hibiscus, the rose, and few more. This is about the unisexual and bisexual flowers. If you think of the process of reproduction in flowers, as we know, flower is the reproductive part in angiosperms or in flowering plants or higher plants. How the reproduction takes place? The whole process of reproduction in flowers is of two. One is the pollination and the other is the fertilization. Pollination, the transfer of pollen grains from where? From anther to where? To the stigma of what? Of a flower is called pollination. It is the transfer of pollen grains, which are nothing but the male sex cells. From where? From the male gonad in the flower called as the anther. To where? To the stigma, which is sticky in nature, and also the female part in flower. So pollination, the first process in reproduction in flowers, is nothing but the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a flower. And this pollination is of two types, the self-pollination and cross-pollination. The process of reproduction in flowering plants under pollination, it has two types of pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. The self-pollination, where the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower or of the same flower in the same plant. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a same flower or another flower of a same plant, it is self-pollination. Whereas the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of another flower of another plant, it is not of same plant, it is of another plant, and that is cross-pollination. Under the self-pollination, the self-pollination does not require any external agency for transfer of pollen grains. In most of the cases, there is no need of agency for transferring the pollen grains because it takes place in, very good Mr. Rahul, in same plant. Another person, Sathwik, is telling it takes place in the same flower also. That's why there is no need of agency for the transfer. Whereas in the cross-pollination, the transfer of pollen grains require external agency. In the self-pollination in bisexual flowers, because both the male and the female parts of a flower are found in same flower. Hence we call such flowers as bisexual flowers. So the self-pollination is carried out in bisexual flowers, whereas the cross-pollination carried out in unisexual flowers. There is no variations observed in self-pollination because it is of same plant or of same flower. So no variations. Whereas the cross-pollination will bring about more variations. From the exam point of view, very important question to all the students is write the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination in flower. What are the agents for pollination? Which are the agents required for pollination? The agents are abiotic agents are there and biotic agents also. The abiotic, the non-living agents or the non-living factors that help in the pollination process, wind, water. The living or the biotic factors which help in the transfer of pollen grains during pollination, birds help in that. Insects, you can observe the butterfly, and also bat or most of the animals, also in animals, bat is one example which is given there. Most of the animals also are the agents for the transfer of pollen grains during pollination process in flowering plants. If I think of the butterfly, an incident reminds me. It so happened, what is the difference between the butterfly and a housefly? The butterfly and an housefly teaches the human race a lesson that we all should be like butterflies, which goes and sits on bloomed flowers with sweet nectar that is there. It only sits on the flowers which have the nectar, that is sweetness. Whereas the housefly sits in all the places, garbage, unwanted material also. So we should be like butterflies and not like houseflies. If we are like butterflies, we will reach God. We will have the good company. Tell me your company. I will tell what you are, says the great sages and saints. Satsangatve nissangatvam, nissangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nischalatatvam, nischalatatve jivan muktihi, bhaja govindam, composed by Adi Shankaracharya, which says that if you are in a good company, your value will rise, you will be good. See the butterfly, comes and it sits and it gets the company of the fresh flowers which are having the sweet nectar. Nobody likes to sit in the place where the houseflies are there, but many likes to sit in a garden where the flowers are bloomed and the butterflies are wandering there. So that reminds to me, if you think of an agent called butterfly for pollination, let us all become like the butterflies and always be in good company. That's why they say, run away from bad company. You should not walk away from bad company. You should run away from bad company. Very important lesson which we can learn from butterflies, which are also an agents for pollination. The next second process of reproduction in flowers is fertilization. What is this fertilization? The union of male and female gamete resulting in zygote formation. It is the fusion or the union of male and female gamete which results in the zygote formation. It is fertilization. You observe here the animated moving one where can just observe the insects are coming and sitting on the anther there, and then you can observe the pollen tube that is being grown. For what purpose? For carrying the pollen grains from where? From the sticky stigma to which the pollen grains are being sticked on, and to the ovule a tube is being developed which we call it as pollen tube. This is the animated picture what you can observe here. The pollination leads to fertilization, where in the pollination you can observe that the insects, one of the agent for pollination process, the insects fly and come and sit on the anthers. Then they transfer the same pollen grains that are sticked on to the legs of those insects when they sit on the stigma which is sticky. And after that there is union of both the male and the female, and the zygote formation takes place with the help of the pollen tube, the germination process which is being observed during the fertilization. Process of fertilization, the pollen grains germinates to produce the pollen tube, which acts as the carrier of male gamete up to the egg. The second point, one male gamete fuses with the egg to form a diploid zygote, and this process is called syngamy. What are the processes that are carried out during fertilization? An important question from the exam point of view. The first thing is a pollen tube is being formed, which carries the pollen grains from the stigma to the ovary. Second point is the pollen grain, one pollen grain or one male gamete fuses with one egg in the ovary to form a diploid zygote, which we call this process as syngamy. The third point, another male gamete fuses with the diploid or two polar nuclei to form a triploid, 3N, primary endosperm nucleus, and this process is called as triple fusion. It is also referred double fertilization. One male gamete with one egg to form diploid zygote, and that process is syngamy. Another male gamete with two polar nuclei fuses to form three triploid endosperm nucleus, and this is triple fusion or double fertilization. After this process of fertilization, so as I have mentioned you all in the earlier class, where you can observe a simple way of understanding this diagram I am just drawing you. So the pollen grains that have sticked on to the stigma, then you can see the pollen tube that is being grown, and it is this, through this pollen tube the pollen grains are carried to where? To the ovary that is there, and inside you can observe one which we call it as syngamy. A diploid zygote is being formed. Then when you think of the another pollen grain combines with two nuclei, which is nothing but a triploid, which is triple fusion. Double fertilization to form the endosperm nucleus. So this is about the process of fertilization, where we can see the further changes in the flower. A pictorial diagram. The flower which is bloomed, the anther which is the male reproductive part, having the anther lobes with pollen grains, what you can observe here, the pollen grains. These are the pollen grains that are being found. The pistil, which is the female reproductive part, having the ovary within it, the ovules, the elongated style, and the sticky stigma. The meiosis, the pollen grains which are going and they are being deposited on the sticky stigma. Then you can observe immediately a pollen tube is being grown deeper into the ovary, and with that we can see the changes that is being taken place here. The diploid zygote, where one male cell fuses with one egg to form a diploid zygote. Here you can see another male sperm fuses with two polar nuclei to form the endosperm nucleus, where you can observe here the primary endosperm nucleus, triploid, 3N to tell you all, triple fusion. Then further, what are the changes you can observe after the endosperm nucleus or the triple fusion and the syngamy has taken place? You can see various changes that are being taken place after the fertilization. That is the results of fertilization. The zygote, which is diploid, develops into an embryo. The ovule develops into seed, and the ovary develops into fruit. The double fertilization leads to formation of endosperm, and the petals, the sepals, the stamen, the style and stigma may shrivel and fall off. Seed undergoes under appropriate conditions develops into seedling, and that process is called germination. So the whole reproduction in flowering plants in two processes, first the pollination and second the fertilization, and finally if these two processes taken place and the seed is healthy, it undergoes the germination. This is the result of fertilization. Dear students, hope that you all have understood in our today's class under the chapter How do organisms reproduce, the part 2, which mainly dealt with the sexual reproduction and in detail about the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, where we understood the whole process of sexual reproduction in flowering plants takes place by pollination and fertilization. If these two processes have taken successfully and a healthy seed is being developed, it undergoes the germination. The flowers are of two types, unisexual flowers and bisexual flowers. Even the pollination is of two types. It may be the self-pollination or cross-pollination. And for the pollination, the abiotic agents and the biotic agents also we understood. Hope all of you have understood, and very happy to see all of you eagerly, with enthusiasm, with interest, with Shraddha. You all are listening and you all are taking down the points. Then what should be the result? Your honesty in completing the home assignment 2. Fill in the blanks. The reproductive part in angiosperms is dash. The second one, the dash develops into fruit after fertilization. The third one, fusion of male and female gametes is termed as dash. Dash flower may have either male or female reproductive parts. Answer the following. The first question. Define the following terms: cross-pollination, B. syngamy, and C. triple fusion. The second question. How does the process of fertilization take place in flowers? Third question. What are the changes observed in angiosperms after fertilization? A question mark for your kind information. Sketch the following and label the parts. A typical flower. Always remember, typical flower means bisexual flower. Very simple to draw is an hibiscus flower. B. The reproductive parts of a flower. Very happy you all are quoting from there itself. One is the stamen, and there is the pistil or the carpel. The third, germination of pollen on stigma, which you have to draw the fertilization process where the pollen tube is being grown, and the process you should depict the parts where the syngamy and also the double fertilization or the triple fusion is being taken place. I hope all of you with the source you have understood. Remember, dear students, everything should come by source and not by force. Source from the heart should feel the joy of learning, joy of understanding, which comes only when you like the subject, only when you develop love for the subject, only when you create interest in that subject. Very happy that all of you have that sort of positivity, and we all shall meet once again under the same chapter for the next part. Till then, hope you will complete the home assignment with honesty and be prepared for the next part of the same chapter, offering all our content at the lotus feet of the Almighty, praying for the world's peace and happiness. Samasta lokaah sukhino bhavantu. Thanking you one and all. Jai Sai Ram.